and welcome to the latest edition of the DigitalCxO podcast. I'm your host, Mike Vizard. Today we're with Duncan Angove, who is CEO for Blue Yonder, and we're talking about supply chains and how AI might transform them. Duncan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Great to see you.
We've been trying to make our supply chains more flexible, agile, shall we say, for quite some time. There's been numerous digital business transformation initiatives launched. In fact, you might argue the term supply chain is a little antiquated because, well, it's a little more complicated than your basic chain. But how much progress are we seeing, and what impact do you think AI will have on all that?
Yeah, so I would say that, it probably started with the pandemic, and maybe before that, the volcanic ash eruption in Iceland, where it challenged a decades old approach to supply chain management, and exacerbated by both forces on the demand and the supply side. So if you think about it, for years we relied on sort of China as the factory for the world and this notion of just-in-time inventory. And it drove massive benefits for everyone around the world for like 20, 30 years. And then the pandemic happened, the regional, sort of issues with Ukraine and China, and then climate change and all of that. And it sort of challenged traditional approaches to it. And so everyone sort of had to step back and say, how do we reimagine it? And by the way, we call it the age of uncertainty. And just when you think you're finally past it, things like the Bangladesh happens. We've got water levels in the Mississippi. Now maybe there's a dock strike on the East Coast. So it's constantly challenging this really fragile approach to supply chain management. And sort of companies' response to it, over the last year has actually been to build inventory. We've seen a buildup of almost, $500 billion of extra inventory put on people's balance sheets. And our perspective is the answer to having a more resilient, more responsive, more customer-centric supply chain isn't adding inventory. It's actually software. Luckily, at the same time, just like you pointed out, this new technology, AI, came along, and it's allowed us to reimagine and do things that were never really possible before in supply chain management. And, we call it new, but really it's not. There's sort of different flavors of artificial intelligence, sort of predictive artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, all of that stuff has been around for a while. In fact, we do 165 billion AI machine learning predictions every month in the cloud. Obviously, the better you are at forecasting consumer demand, forecasting disruption, the more efficient you can be. But the new thing that happened is generative AI came along with large language models. And that opens up a whole nother wave of possibilities in leveraging artificial intelligence to improve the way supply chains run. It's very different than predictive AI, but it has enormous possibilities as well.
It seems like in those possibilities, we can start with some of the simple things, but a lot of times you look at a manifest and you look at all the docs that go around this thing, and it's hard to decipher. So can Gen AI maybe just summarize this stuff for us in a way that mere mortals can figure out what's going on faster?
No, it's a good point. And at the root, it's machine learning, and predictive AI is about numbers. It's deterministic systems, right? Generative AI is based on language models. It's language oriented. And to your point, in supply chains, there is still a lot of documents that go around. We have this thing called EDI, and it's basically documents. Here's a purchase order. Here's a shipment. Here's an invoice, and they're even in a warehouse. There are standard operating procedures. There's lots of this. It's a different language. It's the language of supply chain, but it's still rooted in a language. And there is actually an ability to take all of that domain knowledge and actually train it to do roles in the supply chain that actually free people up. So if I'm a warehouse operator, can I train an analyst to work with them to help diagnose what's going on in the day? If I'm a supply chain planner, can I do the same thing? So there's this idea of supply chain agents that we can build on top of these language models that are informed by all of this domain knowledge. And then you connect them to the systems that actually make stuff move. In the end of the day, inventory has to move in a supply chain. Can you reorient a truck? Can you change the way we're picking items in a warehouse? Can I replan from a different supplier? All of those types of things. So the power of generative AI built on all of this kind of language construct combined with traditional AI is actually where we really see the big unlock in value in supply chain management.
Now, to your point, supply chains tend to be deterministic. We want the right thing to show up at the right place every time, and generative AI is probabilistic. So do people have to accept a margin of error, as it were? Because sometimes the thing may hallucinate, and that's never going to be a good thing if we wind up in the wrong port or in a country that doesn't even exist. So how do I kind of marry these things together in a way that gives me the outcome I need?
Very carefully and very pragmatically. In some scenarios, hallucination is good. If I'm design thinking, I'm trying to create an image, I'm trying to tell a story, right? That's okay. That's what you want. You wanted to hallucinate. That's awful in supply chain, right? As you know, we work in basis points of forecast improvement, in inventory turns, in on time and order fill rates so we can't sacrifice precision. It's absolutely critical, which is why we have to be very, very careful. We hear people that are emerging saying, hey, I'm going to use Gen AI to do forecasting or to do something else. No, that problem's been really well solved by machine learning and by solvers and deterministic systems. Is there a role for it? Absolutely, but it needs to be applied very carefully because we can't afford hallucinations. So figure out the lane that Gen AI is really good at. And then bring it together with machine learning and then connect it to the systems that actually need to make stuff happen, right? I always give the example, like if you see these movies where you have this evil dystopian AI that is super intelligent, it wouldn't be very evil if it couldn't make things happen in the real world. You need a bridge from digital to physical, right? So at some point, like a truck has to move, a robot has to move in a warehouse, you need that bridge.
Right. Who's going to build that bridge? Is it the organization that is running the supply chain that is going to maybe customize an LLM, or is it going to be somebody more like the vendor who provides that as a capability within the application that they're using?
Yeah, no, for Blue Yonder, we built it, right? So we're in a unique position in supply chain software that we're the only software company out there that does both. There are systems that do all the decisioning, the planning, the forecasting, the replenishment, what to put where, and we own the systems that actually execute it, the warehouse management system, the transportation system, all of those things. So the planning stuff, obviously decisioning stuff is where machine learning sits. It's where generative AI sits. So it can actually make intelligent decisions and orchestrate things and leverage all of that power. But we own the bridges that actually make things happen in the real world, right? So we've already built that bridge. We have thousands of API touch points across all of our execution systems. So as we make decisions, we're able to actually execute them. And of course, it's closed loop.
Yeah. In some odd way, are we having a conversation about build versus buy all over again in the age of AI? And a lot of folks are right now experimenting with proof of concepts, and a lot of them are building. But it seems to me most of us are going to wind up just buying this as a feature of something.
Yeah, I think the way to think about large language models, just another computing platform, right? But at the end of the day, it needs access to supply chain content. It needs access to things that it actually has to execute. It has to be trained on domain knowledge, all of that. So I think most software companies will just ship with that inside the product as another computing layer. But it's the apps that get built on top of it. I mean, I think it may have been one of the bankers put a note out last month talking about the missing revenue in generative AI. And it was this idea that people are spending billions of dollars on NVIDIA, on Microsoft, on OpenAI, but there's all this revenue that's missing. And if you look at the ROI required, they said it was some absurd number, like 600 billion in revenue was missing, because in the enterprise, no one's figured out the killer use case yet. Right. So they're spending a ton on infrastructure. They're experimenting. We definitely saw that in the first half of the year. And I will tell you, it's ebbed way off. And, Gartner would say it's the trough of disillusionment. So I think we're beginning to see a return to sort of sanity, if you like.
Right. We did go through some irrational exuberance, as it were, but enterprises don't move on a dime. And so sometimes I think I look at those revenue expectations and say they were a little unreasonable in the first place. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that people are talking about is there's a certain amount of sticker shock that goes with AI. These things are not inexpensive to implement once I start adding up all the tokens for the inputs and the outputs. So are we a couple of cycles away from making this practical?
So every time a new technology comes along, we overestimate the short-term impact and we underestimate the long-term impact, right? You saw it with the internet, you saw it with railways, you saw it with, and now we're seeing it with AI, right? So maybe in the short term, it won't happen as fast as we think or be as impactful as we think. But in the long term, it'll be extraordinarily disruptive. I remember when the internet first came along, or the mobile phone came along, and people were trying to size the addressable market. What's the total addressable market of this thing called a smartphone? And all they looked at was, it's going to replace the analog dial phone. It's going to do all these things. No one thought about the fact that the total addressable market included taxi drivers, that it included the film processing industry, that it included all of those things. And I think it's very, very similar with AI. It's not just the software it's going to enable. It's going to actually go after pools of labor, right? So in our case, warehouse operators, planners, allocators, logistics coordinators, and all of that. Obviously, we're already seeing it in a more rapid pace in other industries like graphics artists and copywriters and things like that, which are very language and creative oriented, right? But it will have as big an impact as I think the internet and the railway.
How dynamic are the supply chains today? I think everybody has it in their head that somehow or other they would like to be able to turn on a dime, and when that container ship hits a bridge, I can go get new suppliers. But in my experience, it takes a long time to onboard a new supplier and work them into that system. So are we getting to the point where those digital workflows are less rigid, and just how agile can we be?
So it's a good observation. And Gartner just came out with something that said 73% of companies have added or removed a production location from their supply chain network in the last 2 years. So we're seeing a generational structural shift in all of that. That's hard to do on a dime, obviously. The thing that stops organizations from having dynamic, agile supply chains is they don't treat it like one. Right? Inside the enterprise, it's treated as point solutions and silos. I have this for warehousing, this for transportation, this for making decisions about where I buy and put inventory, and they don't talk to each other. There's no cross-functional coordination, right? So our strategy to solve that is let's deliver a cohesive application that enables organizations to work across their own internal silos. The second big thing, though, is the way organizations work across their network of trading partners, their suppliers, their carriers, all of that. They've got very poor visibility to when disruptions occur on the supply side. So on average, Accenture did a report, 4.5 days to learn of a supply disruption, and then 45 days on average to resolve it. That doesn't sound fast, agile, or resilient. So that was behind the acquisition of One Network that we announced, earlier this summer, and it brings visibility. So when something happens, you see it instantly. You're able to coordinate internally more effectively and across your trading partners and behave as one, right? That's really the key to a dynamic, agile supply chain.
What role does all our legacy software play in kind of holding us back in that regard? Because we have SAP, Oracle, and all kinds of stuff at the back end on the accounting systems. We have all kinds of stuff. There's custom software everywhere. Do we need to kind of take a minute and just go, look, all this technical debt needs to be kind of either replaced or addressed in some fashion, and that's where we maybe need to start?
Yeah, there's the two answers to that. I mean, first of all, I think of all that stuff as deterministic scaffolding. It's sort of like the plumbing that you need, right? When you think about the system of record and all of that. But so when I talk about this idea of having a cohesive set of applications that sit on a single database, what people don't want, so that sounds great. Yes, I want that. But what they don't want is the Sisyphean endeavor of a monolithic ERP replacement. The multi-year, it just kills people. So our approach was basically to go after what we call something that's more composable. Break applications down into things that are easier to digest, that actually work with all that legacy software, right? So if you just want to do this one thing, all right, here we go. We can just plug it in. And over time, we can surround your legacy software and improve your supply chain. And when you've completed the journey, you actually ended up with a cohesive set of applications that are designed to work together, that sit on a single data model, right? We call it integration debt. You're not moving data around the whole time and having to transform it between silos.
All right. In my Kiki hat is on, I'd call that a microservices-based architecture.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Composable is just another way, a sexier way of saying microservice.
Yeah. All right. So as you look at all this, what's your best advice to folks right now? I mean, besides the fact that they should call your sales team, but, you see execs, they kind of struggle with this. There's a lot of moving parts. Where should they be kind of focusing their time and energy right now?
Well, just to pick up on your core Blue Yonder, I mean, honestly, we have a much more consultative approach in terms of how we engage with customers. It's not about the software, first of all. It's more of a business-oriented discussion around what are your challenges? Is it resiliency? Is it changing customer dynamics? What have we seen elsewhere? What would our advice be? So it's a much, much more consultative engagement because these are multi-year relationships that we build around supply chain. But the thing I will say is now is the time to step back. What we've done for the last 20 years isn't working anymore. Certainly not the approach to just having siloed point solutions that you have across your whole enterprise, and the way that you think about how you collaborate and orchestrate with your trading partners. It's a whole new world. And luckily there's new solutions and new approaches to how you can solve it. But at the end of the day, oriented around what business outcome, what problem are we actually trying to solve together? That would be my recommendation.
All right, folks, you heard it here. Hey, the good news, I guess, is that, if you have that gnawing feeling in the pit of your stomach when you think about the phrase supply chain, you're not alone. Everybody else has the same feeling right now, and we're all hoping that maybe AI will make our lives better, and we'll see, but it's a journey. It's not something you just go out and buy tomorrow and fix all your issues. Hey, Duncan, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, and thank you all for listening to the latest edition of the DigitalCxO podcast. This edition will be on the DigitalCxO website, as well as all your favorite podcast channels out there. So look for it in any place that you download a podcast. Until then, we'll see you next time.